Yeah. All right. Hey, thanks for coming. This is hacking and protecting SharePoint. Before I get started, I know you guys. Oh, I don't know. I saw the movie Edward Snowden. How many of y'all have seen it? No? That movie's so good. I don't know how much of it's Hollywood, but I would say if I saw that movie when I was a young buck, I would probably want to work for the NSA, even though they've done him a pretty bad deal. So a little bit about me. My name is Michael Warton. I'm a project MVP. I do a lot with SharePoint and Project Server, and I do a lot with PowerShell. And hacking's been somewhat of a hobby for me. The other thing, I like to read a lot of comics. These are just some of my favorites. There's one called Hacktivist. It's kind of a cool comic that I read. And then right now I'm reading a book called Damien. It's written about 15, 20 years ago. That's real good. And it's about a process that's running wild. Also like a lot of hardware. I have this is a picture of my workstation. I got my rack with a bunch of servers in there, and then I've got a machine that I like to play with for high performance, and I put different I basically melt ice. I put a big block of ice in there in a bucket and have the coolers chill the processor and just see how fast I can get it. But this is about SharePoint and hacking. I'm going to show you some things how to hack SharePoint, and then I'm going to show you some ways to protect it. So this will be the agenda that we'll be talking about. How many of y'all currently work with SharePoint or seen SharePoint? Looks like roughly half, maybe everybody. I don't know. Anyway, just to give you a little definition of what SharePoint is, it's been around for some time. And it's a collaborative tool for sharing documents and searching for things. And you have a basic out of the box we'll just call SharePoint Standard. Often comes free. And then if you pay a little bit more, you can get the Enterprise version that's built on top of the Standard. And it has other features in there like business intelligence and dashboards and a lot of other services it runs. If you've never seen SharePoint, this is what it kind of looks like. There's a team site. It's very easily configurable. You can throw together sites, customize it, modify it, add web parts. And because it's so flexible, you don't have to be an IT guy to work with it. And then the other side of it is this thing called SharePoint Central. And this is where the administrators can configure SharePoint. And this is just a screenshot of what that looks like. But probably what most of you didn't know, or hopefully I'm going to tell you something new about SharePoint, it really started back in 1985. It was a software package called Vermeer Front Page 1.0. Does anybody remember that? Any old-timers in here? And the reason I bring it up, the company was called Vermeer Technologies Incorporated, and there's this acronym, VTI. And if you've worked with SharePoint, you'll see this VTI. So it's been around, or it's been around a long time. And the reason is Microsoft bought Front Page, and then they rebranded it as Front Page, and then it went through many years of gyrations and enhancements. In fact, at one time Microsoft just had hundreds of thousands of these Front Pages websites. But at one point they said, let's put this into a package. And then later, around 2000, it became SharePoint, and it's gone through many different gyrations to what it is today. Now, just again, a little bit about the architect. Usually, you have end users out in the cloud. Oh, I need to time myself. End users out in the cloud. They'll go through a firewall. There'll be there may be one or more front-end servers. They'll talk to a back-end servers, and then they'll talk to could talk to a SQL database. This is what they refer to as a SharePoint farm, and there can be many different ways this can be architected. And then if you're on the inside of the firewall, you have internal users that talk to the front end, and they do what they do with SharePoint. Now, the other thing I want to point out is for those that have worked with Windows and Internet Information Server, if you've ever been to the Internet Information Server and kind of browse in here, you'll start seeing this VTI stuff. And this is today. You still see these acronyms or names called VTI. And this is important because when I talk about hacking, you're going to see this over and over again. So we'll get into more about the hacking part, but I just kind of found this interesting. This is a page from vedetails.com. It shows all the vulnerabilities that are currently found. And you can, if you go to this web page and then click on products, you'll get a search bar. And if in that search bar you type SharePoint server, if you type SharePoint, you'll get something smaller than this. If you type SharePoint server, you'll get all the vulnerabilities. You can see how they kind of broke them out and into different categories for each year. And then they also broke them down into the different areas where there's vulnerabilities. The thing I would say about these vulnerabilities, SharePoint's actually pretty secure. Most of these vulnerabilities are really coming out of Excel, Word, Outlook, and all these other tools that attach to it. So, who are the SharePoint hackers? Oh, thank you. First button. So who are the SharePoint hackers? Well, last year I spoke here on PowerShell, and I said, who are the hackers? And a few people raised their hands. So how many people are hackers in here? Nobody. That's what. But how many are Pentesters? Well, that's when. So most of us are Pentesters. And then there's the Dark Army. Who knows anybody know what the Dark Army is? No? There's a TV series called Mr. Robot. You gotta watch that. That is just an awesome TV series that just ended the second season yesterday. But there's some really good hackers in there. But also the SharePoint hackers are employees. We have to trust the employees, and we often give them permission to do things, but actually we probably shouldn't give it permissions to do things because they can damage SharePoint. And then there's developers. We never want to trust them, but they can also hack the system. And then administrators, they're given the power to basically hack SharePoint. So you have different ways that this can be hacked. Now, the hacking methods for SharePoint, there's several. One I'll just call brute force, and I'll give you some examples of that. And that's where you just go in there, either manually or write a script, and you start looking for things that are wrong in SharePoint. And my favorite way to do that is using the search engine. The search engine. Because in Google, you can type inurl : and give a last part of this extension right here, underscore layouts and view list. And it will show you all the websites that have that in search. Now, if you see that, that means those websites are anonymous. And when I say anonymous, if you can, at that point, you can go into SharePoint and start browsing around to areas that you're not really, probably shouldn't be looking at. Now, again, I said SharePoint's it's a very secure product, and where it fails is where people make it anonymous and expose it to the outside. If it's on the inside, it's not quite a big deal. And I'll give you some examples of that. Now, the other way of doing it is using Bing, and they call it InStream. And I don't think it works quite as well, but it can also display some pages for you. Some other hacking methods is port scanning. There are a lot of services and endpoints in SharePoint that you can attach to and pull up. And what you want to do is, if SharePoint is misconfigured, your servers will then be misconfigured. And we'll talk more about that. But it's these port scans that you want to run through your network, because in SharePoint you don't want to just open up everything. You want to open up only the ports that SharePoint needs, which we'll talk about when we talk about protecting it. And that's what I was saying here down here, external SharePoint sites. If your SharePoint is not set up properly, then your servers are going to be easier to hack because they're not going to be set up properly. And then there's this tool, this website called Shodan, that if you go to this Shodan site, it will also show you all the servers in the world that are showing they're showing SharePoint in their descriptions. So some of the key things I search for is this extension right here, layouts view list. This is a big potential leak for data, because once you get in there, you're on their site. You can search for VTI bin. Again, if you're seeing this, then it's indicating this is an anonymous site, and you don't need any credentials for logging in. These are other variations. In fact, this one's actually real interesting. If you say layouts / userdis.aspx and force equals true, and then put an ID of 0, it'll pull back a user record. And once it pulls it back, you can pull information like their username, their email address, their first and last name, and just general information that might be found in a SharePoint profile. And I've got a script that will iterate through 0 through 100 and find all the users on a SharePoint site. Now, I was running through this, I haven't done this talk in a while, but I was running through this last night or so, and what I have found is Microsoft has actually tightened up their security, and some of these routines don't work as well as they used to before patches were applied. And then you could also look for front page extensions, and then these endpoints that I was referring to. And here's an example of where I use wget. And so what I did, I found some websites using the view list, and once I saw that, once those sites are shown, I'll plug that site name in here, and then I'll do this wget, and it'll download all the documents. Basically, actually in this example, it takes all the PDF documents and all the subdirectories out of SharePoint, and it'll load them locally to your disk drive or wherever you choose to put them. And this is that PowerShell I was referring to earlier, where we can list all the data 1 through X. This is a function in PowerShell basically where you can iterate through the pages, and then you pass a string to it. Here's the iterate pages. I specify the site URL. I say layouts user disp.aspx and say 1 through 100, and then it'll list all the users that it finds 1 through 100. Now I was going to do a demo, but then I remember I'm at a hackers convention and I don't really want to expose myself to the network. If you've ever been to DEF CON, they really don't recommend you even turn it on your telephone. Anyway, this is an example. I may go ahead, if we have time, I may go ahead and do some of this. But here's where I went into Google, and then I type inurl, and I basically type this right here. And basically what it did, it's listing all these sites that are SharePoint sites. And not only are the SharePoint sites, they're anonymous. So if I can click on any of these, like Texas government, I'm on their SharePoint site. In fact, on that previous page, I took one of those links and clicked on it, and this is what I got. So if you've seen SharePoint, you know this is just a SharePoint site. I'm looking at all the documents, scripts, templates, images, and I'm on their site. And that's kind of to me that sounds really dangerous, because I can go in here and click that sign in, and when I click on sign in, I can get a username password prompt. And at that point, I've gone through all the firewalls, I've gone through all the servers, and now I'm on the Active Directory answering a username password prompt. And at that point, I can brute force usernames and passwords. Anyway, that was from this previous site. I mean, when I did this, that URL right there, I clicked on one of those links, and then I got this. And for the most part, you can click on any of those links, and you will see SharePoint. If I wanted to narrow it down further, I could put the last few letters like MIL for military or government, and then layouts, and then I'd see all the military installations that have that extension. There's United States Marine Corps, Civilian Training Army. For the government, these are government sites. Like there's earlier we saw Texas, U.S. Treasury. Kind of scary. And again, all these are anonymous sites that are being pulled up. And so here's an example where I clicked the sign in, and when I did that, this was Charlotte County, and I got a username password prompt. So I've gone through all the ports, all the firewalls, I've gone through all the servers, and now I'm talking to the Active Directory. So before I leave this, one thing I would suggest is whenever you set up anonymous, make sure you do it right, and then also you may not want to you may want to use some kind of other authentication versus the Active Directory authentication. We use what they call forms based. This right here is just a list of all the different URLs that you can search for, and what's interesting about these URLs are there's many different categories that you can look at, but like this first list of categories, these are all administrative URLs that you can search for, and if you can get to them, then you're actually talking to the SharePoint Central Admin, and thus you're getting past a lot of things. This is spdisco. I'm not a developer now, but at one time these were web services or SharePoint endpoint services that I could access, and then after I can access them, I can then call them, pass parameters to it, and then pull information back or execute things. And when you do call it, it looks like something like this. Again, most of these are functions that are being called. And so going back to this wget, there's a Windows wget that I installed called GNU Windows 32. And then I went on there and executed that script. And when I did that, I had something like this, and basically what it did, that site that I went to, it basically downloaded all the PDFs, and from there, once I got the PDFs, I can start searching their documents for other information that I want to glean out of it. This Shodan site's kind of interesting because this also will. How much time? Oh, it is the time. Okay. All right. Well, let me just summarize. Let's go down to the end. this was about protection. Now I'll be publishing this slide deck, and you can get all this information off the slide deck. The final thoughts is publish your SharePoint correctly. Make sure if you set it up anonymous that you lock it down. Make security a priority within SharePoint. Pen test your sites. In fact, when you go back to your office, make sure when you do that URL thing, make sure your sites don't show up. And if they do, then you need to fix it. I wouldn't tell anybody if they showed up. I'd fix it and then tell them you fixed it. And then also make sure your latest patches are up to date on your servers. And with that, we don't have time for questions, but thank you for coming out today.